I've never heard of this. So yesterday, I guess 200 people in the DOJ write a letter and saying the case against Flynn should not be dropped for whatever reason. And so this is a criminal case. And my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a layman, but my understanding is when there's a criminal case, it's a federal case, it's between the prosecutors of the United States and the defense team. And he said, well, before I make a final decision on withdrawing the case, I'm going to let these 100 people do an America's opinion brief. I've never heard of this.
Right.
What is going on here? And I'm going to bring in Jenna Ellis. Hey, Jenna, you're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Thanks for being with us. You're also with State Senator from Virginia, Joe Morrissey, long-term prosecutor and lawyer. I know you've been on hold. You've heard some of our conversations. Joe, I'm going to start with you and then go to Jenna. I've never heard of this. The judge says, I want other people to weigh in on this decision. What does it have to do with opinions?
All right. First of all, the judge, I don't know that he said, I want other entities to weigh in. If he did, that's wrong. It's also irresponsible for DOJ officials to write a collective letter and say, we think he's guilty, or we know he's guilty, or we have evidence that he's guilty. That's not how our system works. Mm-hmm. I was a prosecutor, I was a defense attorney. It's what takes place in the four corners of that courtroom. What evidence do you produce, all right? Not opinion. We don't try people on opinion polls. And I think it is absolutely wrong to do that. What if, reverse it, say a defendant is on trial and you had people that are supporting the defendant prior to the trial, what's going on, writing these public letters. Okay, now the judge would say, listen, that's not what the way we're doing things here. So,
but in this case, the judge asked. He said, "Go ahead. I'll give you a period of time." Let's bring Jenna Ellis in. Jenna Ellis is the attorney for Trump-Pence 2020. Jenna, what on earth is this?
Yeah, and I completely agree with the assessment that you all are talking about. And as a former prosecutor myself, I'm just appalled at how this case has been handled from start to hopefully what needs to actually be a finish and a conclusion very soon. This motion to dismiss, now that it's coming from the government, in any other case that wasn't so obviously politically motivated and politically driven, would have been dismissed immediately by the judge, just no question. When a prosecutor comes and says, hey, there have been so many mistakes, including withholding Brady evidence, exculpatory materials, there's just no question under the law. But now Judge Sullivan has gone even further, and by allowing this group of former Watergate prosecutors who are clearly biased and clearly politically motivated to now weigh in, it's absolutely absurd that he is putting this off and just to continue to harass General Flynn. And the most absurd part about it, if we can even get further absurd, is the fact that even in this same case, in 24 previous instances, as Sidney Powell highlighted in her motion and her objection to these amicus filings, is that Judge Sullivan, on 24 prior occasions in this same case, specifically denied any other interveners and any other statements or amicus filings, and literally said that the federal rules of criminal procedure do not provide for intervention by third parties in criminal cases. So what's the difference here? Oh, just to delay and harass, and because this is something that he actually wants on the open record. I mean, this is appalling. This is a miscarriage of justice. And this is absolutely fundamentally against the rule of law. And I completely agree with President Trump when he says that this kind of thing should never, ever happen in America. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is not what constitutional due process requires.
But it is happening, Joe.
Yeah, there's a very
important
point that you have to understand here. In 35 years, actually probably 40, because when I was at Georgetown Law, I was involved in the criminal justice program, so we tried cases in federal court. My first case, jury trial I was 23 or 22. I can't remember. I was just in my second year of law school. I can't emphasize this point enough. In almost 4 decades, I have never seen a situation where a prosecutor went before the judge and said, we move to dismiss because of prosecutorial misconduct. And that didn't stop right there. Full stop. That's how it's done. Here, the judge says, well, tell you what, let's do a little poll. Send me some briefs. I want to hear from the world about this. That is disgraceful and deplorable. And that's number one. Number two, the prosecutor has an obligation. Our guest talked about Brady material or Giglio. It is incumbent on the government to turn over evidence that has the potential to help a defendant. Are you clear?
Yep.
Not that it's clearly beyond, clear and convincing evidence that it will help the defendant, if it has merely the potential to help. And it became apparent that the government withheld evidence that had the potential, a lot more than potential, to help Flynn. And the government said that, and the judge is still now pontificating on whether to dismiss it. And I want the folks out there to realize this. I'm not in the Republican corner. I'm a state senator, a Democratic state senator on the Judiciary Committee in Virginia that is looking at this and saying it's wrong. Mm-hmm. What they did to this man. Mm-hmm. And it continues to be wrong. And the judge allowed amicus, that means a friend of the court, brief, now, but he denied it before? Really? When Flynn was being raked over the coals, you denied amicus briefs from being introduced. Fair enough. I get it. But now, while it's still an open case, you not only allow amicus briefs in support of the DOJ, you solicit them.
Unbelievable.
No, unbelievable doesn't describe it.
Jenna, what is the objective here of Judge Sullivan? What is he trying to do?
Yeah, I have no idea, frankly, because this is putting his career on the line. Because anyone who is a judge who just completely flouts the rule of law and appears to be so politically motivated is never, ever the proper decision for a judge. And I'm grateful that, the congressman or the representative that we have on the line as well, who says he's a Democrat. I mean, I'm so thankful that others of not my party are joining in this to say that this should never happen, because this is about our country and our rule of law, not about politics. And justice should never, ever, ever be about politics. And the fact that Judge Sullivan is showing his bias and he is making these decisions, it gives an inference and an assumption that he is not objective here. And so it's mind-blowing, actually, that someone who is on the bench would be so non-credible to actually conduct this type of bench. I mean, it's absolutely beyond anything that should ever happen, and he should be the one person in that courtroom that does not have a side, the one person that is the referee. I mean, that's what the judicial branch is supposed to be, impartial. And, the prosecutors in that room actually have a responsibility as well. Their oath of office is to the U.S. Constitution to do what justice requires. Their client is justice in that room. And the fact that they have now finally moved to dismiss this case is the right and proper thing to do. And there is absolutely no reason in any other case this would be just a judge would sign off on it automatically, especially given the underlying facts here. So, I mean, for Judge Sullivan, it's beyond comprehension what his contemplation could possibly be, because I think his career is on the line.
Well, let me ask you this, Jenna. You said that twice now, that Judge Sullivan's career is on the line. How is it on the line? He has a lifetime appointment to the federal bench. He can only be impeached for certain violations. Do you think that allowing an amicus brief or briefs rises to the level of behavior that warrants warrants impeachment?
I do, and the reason is because it's just so manifestly improper, and the fact that you have him stating on the record in his own minute orders in this particular case. I mean, it's not even like they're analogous cases that he can somehow parse and somehow, try to distinguish. He has said in this case that statements and outside are improper and that the federal rules don't allow it. And so this is the type of conduct that is judicially improper. And even though federal judges do have a lifetime appointment, if we in America would hold our judges accountable and would actually use the power of impeachment for such egregious misconduct, then maybe these judges would not actually have any motivation but to do the rule of law and what justice and the Constitution requires.
Jenna,
and
does
so
an
I
impeachment of a sitting federal judge, does that begin in the Senate, or does it begin in the House?
It would have to begin in the House. And, we have a few other prior instances. I mean, there have been other impeachments of judges and actually removal. I mean, unlike presidents, we've never removed a president from office for impeachment, but we have removed a few judges for egregious conduct in the past. And so we do have precedent along those lines. And that's something, I think that at least his impartiality in terms of how he's perceived by future litigants and what future attorneys can object to and bring in his courtroom. I mean, I as an advocate, it would give me great concern going before a judge knowing that he is something other than faithful to the rule of law. And so absolutely there should be an inquiry. And, if the House wants to have an inquiry over something so frankly outside the scope of what impeachment was designed for when with this whole ridiculous, as President Trump calls it, the witch hunt. And, and I was part of defending the president on the whole impeachment that just happened. I mean, that seems like such a long time ago now, but there was absolutely zero merit to that. It was fully political. And so if the House, as a Democrat majority, doesn't want to conduct the same sort of inquiry and at least look at impeachment in this case, then the Democrats, their only principles are that they have absolutely double standards here, because that's what the founders intended when they gave the impeachment power to the House, is that type of oversight and to look into cases exactly like this that are clearly politically motivated.
Well, first of all, Jenna, don't lump all Democrats together, because you're speaking to one Democrat during that process that said, let's follow the rule of law. Let's follow the evidence. And you're speaking to one Democrat that said that impeachment was not warranted with regard to the President of the United States.
True, quite true. Jenna, I'm going to...
Right, and I want to say, I gave them credit definitely for, for calling the Flynn situation like it is. And I think that if more people were objective, I mean, the rule of law is blind, and it should be objective, and it shouldn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. And that is why this country has gotten so far off course with constitutional issues, because both parties at times can look at things through the lens of party preferences and political preferences when we shouldn't. And that's what constitutionalism, that's what originalism actually means, and conserving the rule of law is to make sure that we aren't looking at political partisan interests. I mean, when you can and when it's valid, there are political branches, but law enforcement and the judiciary, constitutionally, they are not supposed to be politically motivated.
I want to get to two more issues, and we've got 8 minutes, so go ahead.
Say this. Jenna said something very important. When you conflate the due process and the rule of law and fairness with politics, you're going to have a huge problem. And that's why I object so much here. Not that I'm on the side of Michael Flynn. He was when he retired from the United States Army, he made all the conservative talk shows, radio and television, and he was a real thorn in the side to Democrats, okay? I'm not agreeing with all of his policies and positions. But then in February of 2016, he joins the Trump campaign. And in the July 2016 convention, you might remember he strenuously criticized Obama and told the assemblage there that Hillary Clinton should drop out of the race due to her flagrant security violations. And he's ramping up the crowd. It was at that point that he earned the absolute unbridled contempt of Washington insiders, and they decided he's got to go. And then when it was considered that he was going to be appointed, national security director, then it became a full on to get this man. And that, folks, ladies and gentlemen, is what I object to. You might object to somebody's politics. You might object to their positions on certain issues, but you don't go after them for criminal charges because you don't agree with them. And when the government goes after you, they have an unlimited checkbook. They could do whatever they
100%.
want. And that, folks, is the problem here. And that's why I think this. It puts the entire Mueller investigation, makes it suspect now. The entire investigation.
100%. And also that same argument is exactly why President Trump was acquitted, and the impeachment should never have happened either, because it was completely politically motivated. And that exact same argument, you can disagree with President Trump's policies. That's what we have elections for. But you do not wield the power of House impeachment simply to target a sitting president for politically motivated reasons. And that should never happen to any United States president, regardless of the party that they are when they're in office.
I think it did lasting damage to the institution, Jenna. And
absolutely,
there are going to be other presidents involved in other brouhahas, and they're going to first talk is impeachment. And it's hard to believe that almost 200 plus, 225 plus Democrats voted for that. The evidence wasn't there. And this is coming from a former prosecutor and defense attorney that follows evidence. And a Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sink them. Both of you are involved in. Joe, if you don't know this, Jenna Ellis is Trump-Pence 2020 chief counsel. And the Trump campaign has sued media outlets for publishing things as fact, which were not true. And so they filed libel suits against them. Joe Morrissey, because he's not part of the Virginia, Richmond, big money, big business establishment, has been targeted by the local media here for forever, trying to get him out of politics because they can't tell him what to do because he does whatever he thinks is best for his constituents. And Joe has been targeted by media hits, and he is sued for libel. Jenna, I want you to start and then go to Joe, because I think you both are onto something here.
Yeah, well, the fake news media, of course, is they use their power of the pen to politically target whomever they hate. And, certainly the First Amendment gives journalists and, all of us the freedom of speech, and also journalists, of course, the freedom of the press. But that has been so manipulated and so exaggerated to actually go into areas that are not protected by law. And that means that, you and I can have opinions, of course, on anything. We can disagree with policy, but we aren't entitled to our own facts. We're not allowed to say something in the context of an opinion piece that is a provably false fact and then go on and have an opinion about that provably false fact. And that's exactly what CNN, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, which are the three entities that the Trump campaign is suing for defamation, that's exactly what they did. And they tried to couch it in the context of an opinion piece, when really their underlying statements were statements of fact that are false. And the statements in question, of course, differed a little case by case, but essentially we're saying that the Trump campaign had this overarching deal with Russia to influence the election, which is provably false, and they had absolutely no evidence for that in their statements. But what they're trying to do through the power of the pen is to appear to the public that those facts are true and to deceive and mislead their readers and, of course, irreparably harm the Trump campaign and others that they have, of course, others that aren't party to our suits. But that's been the overarching problem with the media, is that they try to use the First Amendment as a shield for intentionally writing things that are knowingly and provably false. And this country, again, if our laws and our rule of law works the way that it was designed, then we would have freedom of speech and would all have opinions. We can agree and disagree and have, a free marketplace of ideas, but we would all be held to the same standard that you can't say things that are fundamentally defamatory and not true.
The free marketplace of ideas, a wonderful quote from an early Supreme Court jurist that I love. I couldn't agree with Jenna more, John. I've filed 3 defamation cases. And do you know how hard it is as a public official to win those? It's okay if you're a public official to say something false about somebody. But if you say it's something that's false and it's also done maliciously or with malice, then that gets you your judgment. It's almost impossible to win. Journalists can be lazy. They have the right to publish a false fact against a public official. But if they do it knowing that it's false, then it rises to libel. And I've won 2. A $575,000 judgment, which I collected on a local market, and a second one, and now I have a third one going right now.
That's the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Yeah, all right.
And you're going to win that one.
Well, I'm going to fight it, John, because that's what I said earlier. Somebody said, Joe, what does it cost you? I don't care what it cost. If I don't do it, it will be done against somebody else. And I led the mayoral race for 10 months, wire to wire, until they were determined that that Joe Morrissey was not going to be mayor, and they published false facts that they knew were false, demonstrably knew that was false, and you know what? A jury's going to decide it. So let's just be clear. I believe in the power of free speech and the press, and I understand it should be a big hurdle, New York Times versus Sullivan, to overcome that. But you cannot say something that is false against a public official, knowing that it's false, and do it with malice. There's got to be accountability.
Cats and dogs
Absolutely.
Living together. Joe Morrissey, state senator, lawyer, prosecutor, Democrat. Jenna Ellis, Republican, Trump supporter, the chief legal counsel for Trump-Pence 2020. Great discussion, 2 of my favorite people.